My name is Felix Hess. I'm from the Netherlands, and the title of my talk is From Science to Sensitivity, and it's a little bit personal talk about how my work developed. Now, when I was a little boy, I was very curious. I wanted to understand everything. I wanted to understand the whole universe, as it were. Later, I had a chance to go to university, and my main subject was physics, and I wanted to become a physicist. And a great example for me was, of course, Albert Einstein. I wanted first to learn about and to work in the most fundamental physics of the universe. But it turned out to be quite different. First of all, I'm not Albert Einstein, and then I was distracted by other things. It began like this. Towards the end of my physics study, I found somewhere mention of boomerangs, from which I had to conclude that boomerangs really exist. Boomerangs are these wooden objects made by Australian Aboriginals, and you throw them through the air and they fly and they come back. It's not a thing that comes back when you throw it up and comes back, but it flies around and comes back. I had always believed that boomerangs, like flying carpets, only occur in fantasy stories. Now, I had to realize they really exist. I wanted to know, how is it possible that when you throw a thing through the air, it flies around and comes back? I went through the whole library of the physics lab to find a good explanation, and I couldn't find one. In a very solid German textbook, there was a serious explanation, obviously completely wrong. So I had to do it myself. I began by having a very, very simple aerodynamic theory, because the thing flies through the air. A friend of mine helped me to program a computer, that is, to write when I use these words computer and software, it's completely different from nowadays. It was in the 1960s, and the computer was a huge machine in a sacred space in which you were not allowed to enter. And it couldn't make pictures, it could only print digits and numbers. And at night, I threw a boomerang, and first I had to teach myself to throw boomerangs, and then I could make boomerangs, and then equip the boomerang with a small light at the end, and a battery in the middle, and photograph the flight path with time exposure. Here you see one. This is done in 1967. In the middle of the night, at full moon, that's why you can see the clouds. But it's really nighttime. So here the boomerang, it starts and it flies around and it returns here. So that's already nice to do that at night, huh? I mean, you can see it's not fundamental physics, this, but I like to do that. Now, the time came that I finished my physics study, but I still had not resolved completely how boomerangs work, and it was time to do my PhD work. A mathematics professor heard about this and said, if you like, you can come and work with me. I'll try to get a government grant for you. You can do your PhD on the aerodynamics of boomerangs. So I was very lucky. Yes, for 7.5 years I worked on boomerangs with good payment. I made boomerangs, several types of boomerangs, equipped them with lights and with a little electronic gadget which switches the light off twice a second, and used 2 cameras. A friend of mine would operate 2 cameras like that. So you get 2 pictures, and you see later with the stereo viewer, you can see a 3D picture of the boomerang flight path. So this, I won't show it. I didn't bring the stereo pictures here because we have no stereo viewers. And in the meantime, the computer was supplied with how should I call that? A line plotter. You couldn't make no images with a computer, but line drawing. So a pen on a piece of paper could make a drawing. And there were 2 drawings made, and through a stereo viewer you could see it in 3D and compare immediately the photograph with the theoretical flight path. That's also nice to have stereo pictures. I had to spend so much time on a horrible kind of mathematics that I didn't like, but I had to do it in order to understand boomerangs. After 7.5 years, I had to finish my PhD work because the money ran out. I was already unemployed. And I had been reading all the time everything I could find about boomerangs. Most of it literature from the 19th century, from, let's say, well, depends on how you call it, ethnological literature. A lot of it about Australian Aboriginal culture. And I really got interested in Australia. I really wanted to go to Australia because of that. So in 1975, after getting my PhD, I found myself a job as a mathematician. I had become clever in mathematics. I didn't like it, but I had become clever in it. I could get a job at the University of Adelaide, and there I lived in Australia for 3.5 years. And as you all know, the nature in Australia is so different from here. The plants are different, the animals are different, the land is different. Well, the people are British, most from British descent, but nature is completely different. For me, everything was new. And in the garden, at the edge of the garden, there was a small flow of water, which they call a creek over there. And at night, strange sounds came from. And I was told those are frogs, but very different from Dutch frogs. And it's beautiful. I found it very beautiful, you know, how these wave-like sounds and rhythms of these frogs. That's why I began listening at night. I bought sound recording equipment to make stereo recordings of frog choruses in very, very quiet places. In Holland, you cannot find a quiet place. There's always traffic noise. But in Australia, you go into the outback, and it's very quiet here. And there are very, very many different sort of frogs there. And I brought here 3 samples to give you an idea how these frogs can sound. They're all very different. So may I hear a little bit of the first track, please? So these are 2 frogs alternating. Please track 2 if you can. See the frogs make clicking sounds. And a lot of insects here. Please, may I now hear the 3rd track of the frogs? Maybe These frogs were floating on the water surface, and they're called barking frogs. Okay, thank you for the frogs. Okay, now, I made many, many such recordings, and some of them were very beautiful. But you know, when you have a recording, it's not live and it's not interactive. And in reality, what happened when I was listening to frogs and recording them is very peculiar, you know. You have first to find a place where you hear the frogs being active. Maybe I would hear the frogs over there. So I would walk like this, And they were always further than I thought they were. So I would walk further. And then I would hear them behind me suddenly. Ah! So they heard my footsteps and they became silent when they were very shy when they would hear my footsteps. When I would be still, then in the distance the frogs were still calling, and as a wave the sound would approach me until they were calling next to my feet. So obviously the frogs are listening, and I had a very simple idea about that. Apparently when they hear each other of the same species, they become more enthusiastic. And when they hear foreign sounds like human beings or cars or whatever, they become very shy. So the frogs are listeners. Huh? And it's really remarkable that a group of frogs makes a concert which has waves and rhythms, and there is no conductor and they have no score. So how do they do it? They must do it through listening. So back in Holland, listening again and again to some of my very beautiful recordings, I found them boring after a while. Each time it's exactly the same. And in reality, it's always different, you know. It depends on the weather, it depends on the light, of course it depends on the season, it depends on the humidity, it's unpredictable. Also, there is of course a reason why frogs call. It's for sexual reasons. And the males call, advertising themselves, and the females listen, and who has the nicest voice. And that's for mating purposes. I wanted to have a live chorus, and I thought maybe I could have small electronic machines in which these principles are built in. That is, they recognize each other's voice. When they hear each other, they become more enthusiastic. When they hear other sounds, they become shy. I saw it as a science project, and I built, with the help of technicians, a set of electronic sound creatures. I brought 4 here. I built 100 of them. You need a big group for having group interactions. Let's see if I can switch them on. So you bah! So, see, they're shy. It turned out that when you have a group of these machines, that indeed you get they sound a little bit like crickets. That's because they need a simple voice, or else they cannot recognize each other with simple electronics. It's I thought it's a kind of theoretical biology, which nowadays it would be considered as such. At that time, biologists were interested but didn't offer me any jobs. It was musicians. They say this is art. It's sound art became popular in the 70s, and they said what you're doing is art, and you're an artist. Look, I got used to that. For me, it was research. Right? Just to give a sort of technical idea how these things work. See the next picture. Yeah, here. See, each machine has an ear. That's a microphone. It has a mouth, which is a speaker. That's there. And the microphone is an ear, which is on the left. It has a battery, which is its food. And it has some electronics, all analog electronics, which is the rest of its body and soul. the sound that comes in, the microphone changes the sound into an electric signal, and then there is a recognizing filter which checks if the sound is of the right kind. There's a beep, 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 beep. What comes through I call good sound, and the rest I call bad sound. And that's stored in sort of storage bins which are called integrators. The level of the good integrator is the eagerness of the machine, and the level of the bad sound integrator I call the shyness. And there is something which compares the two. When the eagerness is higher than the shyness, the machine will call, and then it will discharge the integrator. So it stops calling. And then all the time, the shyness leaks away, so he forgets the bad sound. And the call generator, which makes the call, and the recognizing filter, they should fit like a lock and key, or else they cannot recognize each other. So that's basically how they work. Now the next project I did is I make machines which have two ears. They're about this size in reality. And you see they have two ears. They're blind. They find each other by ear. They have stereo hearing. And two wheels and a third wheel driven by motors, and a third wheel for balance, and a touch sensor. And these, when they call, they give a concert and they move through space on a floor. They find each other. But yeah, real frogs do that for mating purposes, and these are of course sterile. After a while they would just clump together if there would be nothing else. So I gave them a second call when the touch sensor touches something. They stop moving forward and they emit a different call, which means go away. So if a machine recognizes that call, it backs away. So that way they keep moving all the time. This project was really a great success. It brought me to Japan several times. But I learned one thing from it. It is very much work to make them. It's really complicated, and it's not better art. Okay, let me see what I did next. I was now totally focused on listening, machines that listen. It's all began with the frogs. The frogs make their concert on the basis of listening. But you know, there are many sounds that we cannot hear. For instance, there are sounds that dogs can hear, and cats can hear, and mice can hear. These very, very high-pitched sounds, which are called ultrasound. And bats use that for echolocation. We cannot hear that. On the other hand, there are also very, very low-frequency sounds. Very deep rumblings, which we cannot hear, and these are called infrasound, or you can call them air pressure fluctuations. It so happened that all these cheap microphones are used for the sound creatures, really the cheapest stuff you can get, you know. Some were made in some oriental country, and you can buy it for a very cheap price, you know. Very rubbishy microphones, so sloppily produced that they happen to be sensitive to infrasound, which is normally undesirable. If you select them, you can get some really good infrasound microphones. I've made small machines that translate these infrasound things to sort of crackling, so you could hear it. And let me see. You can also do something else with that. See, this is just an electric light bulb. And it has a cable in which there is a small piece of equipment, which is a dimmer, and an air pressure sensor, which has one such very cheap microphone. And when the air pressure fluctuates, the light goes up and down. You see, there's a lot of air pressure fluctuation in this building. Probably because there is air conditioning somewhere, or doors open and close, or it's windy outdoors. I think, where's the sensor? So here's the sensor. If I do this with my hand, you see it has an enormous effect. It's quite amazing how much of this infrasound is around. all the time. Okay. Now because the picture is up here, that is a slightly different project. That's one where light is changed into sound. So you see 4 solar cells and 4 candles. This is just an experimental setup. There's a little bit of electronics that takes the energy from the solar cells and changes that into crackling sounds. So you use a self-made loudspeaker. A piece of wood, a stone, and in between a piezo plate. It's not. I made a mistake. This is not an air pressure work. It's a different kind of work. This is just an ordinary light bulb. You know, it's one installation. I have perhaps 20 of these light bulbs lying on the floor. But here there are lanterns, Japanese lanterns, which I bought in Tokyo. And of course, it's a still picture, so you cannot see how the light goes up and down with the air pressure. But there are various ways in which you can show that work. Now, infrasound, although we cannot hear it, it's still sound, only the frequencies are far too low. And I was very curious what happens if you would hear it by speeding it up. Now, if you play it at much higher speed than when you record it, every pitch gets higher, and maybe you can hear it, huh? So I made myself a digital stereo infrasound recorder by a dedicated laptop, a commercially available for scientific purposes data acquisition card, made software, built 2 infrasound, very sensitive infrasound microphones, you call them, or sensors, and a friend who had a very large piece of land. I used that to make the recordings. It needed to be very large because I had chosen to speed the sound up by a factor of 360. So that it becomes audible. Huh? So it means that 1 second on the CD that I made was 360 seconds, so this is 6 minutes, and 24 hours is reduced to 4 minutes. And in order to get good stereo, you know how we hear stereo, it can be that the left ear hears a little bit stronger than the right ear, but it's also the time difference. So if the sound comes from the left, it first reaches this ear and then that ear, and the small time differences make us hear direction. And in order to get that right, when you speed up everything so much, you must start out with a very long distance between the 2 sensors, 360 times as far as our ears are apart. So something like 65 meters. And that's why I needed a friend with a big piece of land. And what you hear when it's sped up is all kinds of beeping sounds, which are deep rumblings from factories or heavy traffic, such small clicking sounds like autumn leaves, which come from doors opening and closing. Maybe the neighbors might have a washing machine on, you would notice that. And supersonic airplanes, and sometimes the ocean when it dances. A specialist of the Royal Dutch Meteorological Institute informed me about that when there is a depression over the ocean, let's say near Iceland or so, it can make the sea dance like that. And that emits infrasound, which travels for thousands of kilometers. So it's hard to catch it sometimes. But if we can now have a little bit of track number 4, you can hear some of that infrasound sped up, so we can hear it. It's rather boring. See, most of what you hear now is just the wind in the microphones. That was the infrasound. It's really amazing how much of there is around. It's all made by human culture, except for the wind in the microphones, which it's hard to get rid of, and the sound of the ocean, which can be very beautiful. The ocean goes then like this, about this slowly. And the sound that comes out is, on such a lamp, you see the lamp then going like this, the light going up and down like that. When you hear it 360 times sped up, you hear it as a sort of almost singing tone. Okay, let me see what I've got here. The air not only has pressure fluctuations, which we call sound, but it also moves everywhere. And this is a piece, I could show it only once. You must have a really dark place. It's a bowl, a round bowl with water in it. And there is a mirror lying in the water. And there is outside of the image a lamp which shines on the water surface. And it reflects, and you can see this oval reflection from the water. But it also, some of the light gets into the water and hits the mirror and then comes out of the water. That's how you see the second reflection. But also it can then, first go into the water, hit the mirror, come to the surface of the water, reflect back, and hits the mirror again and comes out. Then you get the third reflection. It can also happen once more and you get the fourth reflection. I found it very beautiful. The fourth reflection, for instance, had all colors of the rainbow. It just happened I found an old mirror in my drawer from my student days, and it was slightly curved, a sloppy mirror. I tried to get mirrors, and all the mirrors are so perfect. You cannot find mirrors which are slightly round. I tried to make them in the physics lab, but I couldn't. So this is a piece which is very, very sensitive to the slightest movements of air. If the water surface is just slightly moving, or the floor trembles, all these reflections move, especially the fourth one. It's really, really alive. And the person who is in charge during this exhibition has to clean the water every day because dust particles come on here. And you will see the dust very strongly on all the reflections. It's a very sensitive piece. And now this one, that's one that's basically quite similar to what's in the Hutton Gallery now. I always wanted, right straight from the beginning, let's say straight after I did the work with the sound creatures, I wanted to do something with dance. But that's hard, to have a group of dancing machines with it on batteries. But I was interested now, I had become interested in the movement of air, and I found that you can get a kind of dance out, if you want to call it a dance, by making small wind vanes out of paper, which are carefully balanced. And they follow the airflows along the floor. This was done in Germany. This is the first time there were maybe about 500 vanes here. In the Hutton Gallery there are also 500 vanes, but the Hutton Gallery has a far more beautiful floor. But this floor is so light you hardly see the vanes. These are always moving. The air is always in movement. Yeah, it's strange. I'm looking at it and I don't see the move here because it's a still picture. So that's about what my talk is about. But okay, it all began with frogs. So I'll show you one more picture. This is a picture of a frog and a calligraphy made by a Japanese Zen Buddhist master in 1930. You see, the frogs were, without my knowing, they were my teachers. If I would be taught like that by a human being, I would be eternally grateful. Now I'm grateful to the frogs. That's why I show this picture. And the text says, in the morning swallow the sun and moon, in the evening spit out the universe. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you for listening. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Felix, you said the little frog electronic animal had a soul.
That's our human prejudice, you know. It's funny. It's so strange. Working with technicians on this first electronic sound creature project, everybody talked about them as if they're animals. It's just that's how we humans are, you know. We tend to well, that's our way of thinking. It's easy to think about as if they're, even with computers you say he, or mostly it's he, huh? He doesn't want to do this or so. Huh? It's inescapable almost to think about these things without thinking that they have feelings. At least they're very sensitive and they have some kind of intelligence. So I call it a soul, yes. But I don't know what a soul is, or even in a human being I don't know what it is.
Do you want to maybe say a little bit about how you installed the paper veins? Because it's not just the sensitivity of experience and airflow, it's actually the sensitivity of the installation technique as well.
Okay. I almost never use walls for my work. The sound creatures, for instance, I just here put them somewhere arbitrarily, but normally they hang from the ceiling suspended over the whole space and people walk underneath them, so the sound comes from everywhere. The veins, however, are put on the floor in a very simple manner. I mean, I didn't bring one here. You can see them in the Hutton Gallery. But each vein consists of a square piece of Japanese rice paper, very thin, and a little stick of balsa wood, very lightweight and very fragile. And it has a small counterweight. Maybe I can show the picture again. Let me see. So, for instance, here, that's a piece of paper. Here's a piece of wood. That's a piece of lead to counterbalance it. And what you cannot see because of the limited resolution of the picture, there's a needle here, which if you hold it on your finger, it just balances. And it stands on a piece of silver wire, which is either glued to the ground or there's a very tiny hole drilled in the floor. And that's where the metal stand is fixed to the floor. And on top of the metal wire is a cup of glass on which the needle rests. And the way to get these glass cups was for me to buy several hundred bicycle light bulbs and smash them with a hammer. And then you get lots of pieces of broken glass, and some of them are usable. Let's say half of them are usable and half of them you have to throw out. And you have, for almost no money, you have glass cups. The needles, I was the only male customer in a shop where women buy things for sewing, so I bought all the needles below a certain thickness, all of them. And so that's how I construct them. It's very delicate work, but it's very, very, very low tech. The beauty of it is there is no electronics in it, and it is a kind of dance. Because we live in a very strange society, people are used to electronic stuff all the time, and also are used to being manipulated. And with these sound creatures, for instance, the first time I showed them, people thought they were remotely controlled by infrared or so, or by radio controlled. That's why I wanted to have something without electronics. This piece is really very, very simple. There's no electronics in it. A child can see how it works. There's nothing hidden about it. Nevertheless, on 2 occasions, when I showed this work, mostly there's no space for 500, maybe 100, something like that. But on 2 occasions, and it must happen more often, but I heard, and it's the situation is typical. There is a man and a woman. And the man pretends, or maybe is very technical, and he thinks the woman doesn't know much. Huh? So the man says to the woman, he explains how it works. There are hidden magnetic fields. The artist has a computer somewhere, and that's. But I picked that sound up and say, sorry, it's just the air. So even in this piece, people think they can think they're being manipulated, and there are guys explaining it to young girls or let's say to attractive women who they think are stupid. I mean, it drives me crazy, to hear such things. Okay, there's nothing hidden about it. It's quite open. And what I found out when I tried it out in my living room, it took me many months to develop it because I didn't know exactly how to make it at first. It is amazing, really, how the air flows. It is in movement all the time. When you walk, you can see it yourself. When you walk, already a few meters ahead of you, you push the air away. And behind you, you make two cyclones. And in my house, I noticed in the morning, the sun is on one side. In the evening, it's on the other side. It changes the temperature. And that changes also the airflows. So the slightest influence moves these things. And it happens all the time, only we don't see it. So my task was here, let's say, what I do as an artist is not to make any new forms, but to make something audible or visible, which normally you don't notice at all. And this is very humble, just the air, the way it moves along the floor. It's nothing more than that. And it can flow very beautifully and quite unexpectedly. And it's always in movement. So is that an answer to the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
And have you stayed in touch with any of the scientific communities?
Pardon?
Have you stayed in touch with any of the scientific communities that you were?
Oh, I need to earn my money. I needed to earn my money. Art didn't bring me much money.
Mm-hmm. But in a sense, this is research into the sun.
Oh, no.
And is that fed back
No.
into
In the
science?
1990s, I was invited to a scientific meeting as a light touch, bringing my sound creatures, and I was from art back into the science world, and there were people working. They call this field artificial life. It is a new part of theoretical biology. People working with robots that are intelligent, or groups of robots, and they asked me they did it at universities internationally. And they asked me, when did you make these machines? I said, it was one in 1982, the others in 1987. You were ahead of your time. See, else I could have make my money that way, but no, I had to take less and less attractive jobs to earn my money. Yeah. But it's fun. I could do what I like. No more questions?
You're talking about the way that your frogs communicate, but also an overlap, I think, with the infrasound is the way that elephants communicate. Do you know that?
They say that, yes.
Yeah.
But they call infrasound everything which we cannot hear, and that is below 20 cycles per second, which is not very far. Infrasound. The infrasound that I recorded goes up to 30 millihertz, down to it's very far below 1 hertz.
Yeah.
So it's really very far infrasound. With elephants, probably elephants have ears like we have. Perhaps they can hear a little bit lower tones, but it's not very far infrasound. But I don't know exactly. I don't know elephants, but it cannot be very far lower than what we can hear.
So I think if there are no more questions, we'll probably wrap up. Thanks so much for coming over, Felix.